Doing? Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday, and welcome to this month's themed Prasada Talks. So, our theme for this month is play, and we're talking today about why adults need play. I'm Meg Townsend. In case we've not met before, I'm a whole being guide and the director of program development here at Prasada. And I am joined today by Alice Dommert. Alice, tell us a little bit about you.
Yes, thank you, Meg. It's always fun to be here. I am the founder and CEO of Prasada and a avid player.
An avid player. So tell me in this moment today, from 1 to 10, one being like, I feel like a rock, and 10 being I'm swinging on a trapeze level of playing. Where are you? Your feeling of play, your level of play.
Well, so it's so hot here in Philadelphia, and I've been putting my air conditioners on inside, and what I notice is when that happens, I start to feel like a bug in a jar.
Mhm.
So this morning, before it got too sunny, I brought my chair out and I kind of let my lawn grow up a little bit, like just go wild. So I sat outside and had my little drink that I made for myself, my morning drink, and sat outside and watched the ants crawl all over. And so that just being for me, being outside is a form of play. And that always just really sets my day. So sun started creeping and got too hot and I came inside. But it really did set my day. Made me just so happy.
I love it. I love it. So you're creeping up there, not a complete sort of unplayer today. And hi, everybody who's joining us in the Zoom room live with us, or if you're watching live on Facebook, or thank you if you're watching the recording. Welcome, welcome. So I'd love to know, and you can use the chat feature to communicate with us. We'd love to know what, when you hear the word play, what comes to mind, or what feeling does that evoke for you? Share in the chat. We'll kind of get to those as we keep going. But Alice, I want to pose that question to you. When you hear the word play, and you already said you're an avid player, so you're on board. Has that always been the case with you, or have there been seasons of your life where you've kind of moved in and out of play, or shifted your relationship with play?
Yeah, I think for all of us, we go through seasons where we just have a lot going on. If you have just had a baby, or if you're in the middle of finishing up a big project, or if you're preparing to go on a trip or coming back from a trip, there are times where you'll just kind of be on that, you have to get all the stuff done. And so you'll eliminate those little moments. And so I have definitely had phases, and usually those were phases where I got very cranky, and the people that I lived with were asking me, could you please start going back to your yoga class, or could you please start doing something? Or notice People have noticed, there was a while where I was taking a hat making class, and I was going into New York once a week, and I was just making all sorts of hats. And that was a time that I just really felt the happiest. So
Mm.
I know that, like, having those, even if it's just little elements, and I'm gotten much better about figuring out. Well, lately I've been into neuro art, where you draw lines and then connect all the corners, and it's a nice little. In the past, it was like I needed a lot of time for play. Like if I was going to go out for a hike, I wanted to go out for an hour and a half hike. And now I've realized that a 20-minute walk around the block is still that being outside, that movement, that activity, that a form of play for me.
And so and you love books. If you know Alice, or you've been around Alice at all, or heard Alice talk, Alice has a book for everything. So tell us what book you're reading about play right now that's kind of inspiring and guiding some of our talking points today as we dive into this. Because as we were just talking about this to prepare for this talk, the author says they don't really want to define play, which is usually how we start any sort of Prasada talks, is let's define what we're talking about. So can you kind of launch into that?
Yeah, this book is called Play. The subtitle is How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, and Invigorates the Soul. And this guy, Stuart Brown, wrote this in 2009. And so he's been around for a while. He still has he's still pretty active. And what he says is he doesn't like to define it because it's an art and it's all these things. Um, he says that play though has some properties. And
Okay.
so let me share some of the properties. And before we even looked into this book, Meg and I were kind of brainstorming and came up with some of these similar properties. And I've skimmed through this book and picked it back up again. And so it's been interesting to sort of, as I come back to it, just in the own phases of my life. The first one, and we had definitely talked about this one, was it's apparently purposeless. So we talk so much about being purposeful, but it's done for its own sake. So that means there's no real goal for it. Now, when we get into some of the different types of play, it might be that, you can enjoy something, but if it's really play, it's actually that it's just for fun. It's voluntary. You're choosing to do it. It's not something that you have to do. It's not like you might enjoy going to, let's say you're on a soccer team. You might enjoy going to soccer practice. It might be a form of play, but really in the bigger definition, play is just more of that freedom. Inherent attraction, like you want to do it. Like you're thinking like, I'm going to get my work done. And for me, that's one of the ways that I use play is it's the carrot.
Mhm.
Like when I have set up good things that I want to do in between my work. So if I've got a little sewing project or I've got something else that I want to do, I will be much more efficient in my time boxing because I want that 10 minutes to be able to do that thing. Also, a really helpful way to not be doom scrolling. Sometimes our minds just want that off. They want that time not in the thinking mode. So having some little play that you can do. Freedom from time. So that freedom flow, diminished consciousness of self. You lose track of kind of yourself. You're not as self-conscious. Improvisational potential. So if you think about musicians, a lot of musicians, and that element of kind of coming together with other people and that improv component. And then the continuation desire, meaning you want to keep doing it. Usually you kind of just remember when you were a kid, and somebody said, okay, it's dark, you have to come in, but you could have played with your friends out by the creek or whatever for many, many years. Which one of those resonate for you when you think about?
Well, actually, one strikes a little bit of terror, so it resonates in a strange way, is the improvisational piece. And
Mm,
and I'm thinking about like the thing that I love that there's really not a definition of play. And because it is so unique and different for everyone, and everyone can get a sense of play from different activities and different things. So, my former life, I was in theater and in opera. And my whole life I've been a musician. And the one thing that always terrified me was improvisation, always, or doing an improv class, an improv theater class, like would completely shut me down. I hope we're not frozen. Can you still hear me? Okay, you can still hear me. Okay. That all of that would completely shut me down. Like that was not a play that
mm,
I could access or that felt good ever, even to this day. That's not an aspect of play that like lights me up or that I want to do. But for some people, that's it. That's everything. They go to those classes and they just like come alive and can be really creative. But for me, the ones that resonated, but I want to share that just because sometimes play for somebody can be like terrifying for somebody else. And it's not necessarily because I'm a serious adult. It's just because it's a comfort edge that I've never been able to push through as a human. But the diminished consciousness of self, I think, was a big one, and the freedom from time. And I've experienced that, and the sense of play evoked uh, when I'm in nature, especially when I'm around water or in the woods. Because as a kid, that's where I grew up, spending time with my aunt in the summertime, and we would just run wild through the forest on our little piece of land, play in the, run over the rocks, play in the creek or the crick, as you might say if you're from that part of northern Pennsylvania. And I noticed that even in myself to this day, like sometimes I'm worried about, my cranky knees and what they'll do. But if you put me in a creek, I will be like jumping around like I am 5 again, not even thinking about like, is this going to hurt my ankle or my knee? I just come alive and I'm really playful and looking at different things and splashing and swimming and laughing. And that's a big experience for me. And then just being with kids too.
Yeah.
Like that helps me kind of have this diminished consciousness of myself. You might see me in certain aspects of life. And then when I get around a little kid, we're just like in this pretend land. I have a friend who has a little 2.5-year-old, and she came over last weekend or 2 weekends ago. And she just kept running after me, Maggie, 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 Auntie Maggie, play. I want to play with you. And she just really, so we somehow I like kids help me really tap into that playfulness, and I can just kind of be in that space with them. And it's like, I don't care what time it is. I don't care what any adults around me think when they're watching me, you know, play
Yeah.
play with this kid and be a kid too. So those are the two that really resonate with me, and kind of the spaces and places they show up.
Yeah. I love it in the chat. Somebody put play is fun. Yeah, that definitely, it's got to feel, it's got to have that energy. And then play and experience with some unstructured elements where spontaneous moments occur. Yeah, that
Yeah.
freedom. Yeah, I'm the same way. If there's a group of adults and a group of kids, I will usually gravitate toward the kids because, there's that, and if you think about it, there's, especially in social situations, there's that like awkwardness of like, hi, what's your name? What do you do? Where are you from? Where kids just are like, they don't need all those bonding and rapport things. They're just like, hey, let's go do this thing. You watch
Yeah.
kids on the playground. So I love that element.
But I feel like going back to that piece that you just said, though, of like the introductions or the icebreakers with people, I feel like so many of us really want that. I feel
Yes.
like we forget or we stop doing that and need practice. So if you were at a party meeting new people, Alice Dommert, avid player, what would be a question that you might pose to people? I want you to answer this so I can steal this, because I still have that social awkwardness sometimes. What would something be that you would ask people to kind of like open into that different space rather than just kind of the basic, what do you do? Where
Yeah.
do you
So
live?
there's a friend of mine who has done these classes in authentic relating. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but you go to these parties with people and then they have particular activities. And some of the questions I've just kind of pulled. One of them is somebody like, what surprised you this week?
Hmm.
Or surprised you today? Or like recently, I was on a trip with my daughter and we were visiting some people who have lived in Paris now for a year. And I said, what's been the most surprising thing about your experience? And people usually just are like, oh, yeah, they'll just go on and on to talk about that. So that's one of them. And I agree with you. It's, when you have those situations where you've got an icebreaker, it's way easier if somebody says, okay, tell the person, or one of the things we do in our programs is tell somebody something that they wouldn't expect of you. So, like our friend Nicole always says, she knows how to ride a unicycle. So, and part of that is usually there's some humor, some lightness in that, and people just when we laugh, when we get a little bit less tense, and we start to have a little bit more of that flexibility, both physically and mentally, emotionally.
Hmm.
So yeah.
I like that.
Though it's interesting because, asking people questions, some people like to have questions asked of them, and other people don't really like to have questions. So for some icebreaker, that might not be the best asking.
Be prepared for the flop
Exactly,
and
exactly,
have a good backup joke.
exactly,
Nothing
exactly.
else fails. So what happens though when we stop playing, right? It's because at some point, we're born curious, and we see this in kids all the time, but then life sometimes informs us and challenges we get,
Yeah.
like shuts that down. So what happens
Well,
when we stop playing?
well, and it's interesting because you think about like, I don't think that any of us are like, today I'm not going to play. However, we do, and I call it the flywheel of work, of life. You
Mhm.
get caught in the, I've got to do this next task and this next task and this next task. And I know that I've gotten kind of addicted to that high level of like just on.
Mhm.
And then when I pull back, sometimes you can be like, well, you don't want to be bored, or all the hobbies have been put back in the closet for me, because I thought they were too big and they were messy and you didn't want to leave them out. It's interesting because he talks about how, about people who, if we let the play drive express itself well into adulthood, as we are built to do, we find opportunities to play everywhere. So that's one question, is like, is play just an activity, or can I mean, if you go to the grocery store at Giant and you look for Marty, Giant can be a playground because Marty is the big thing
At the
that,
robot?
yes, it's the robot. So
No,
my
scary.
partner and I have the joke of always being like, "Hey, Marty, how's it going?" And everybody's like looking around like, "Who's Marty?" So you can have just a playful attitude about life.
Mhm.
Um, but he says the brain keeps developing, adapting, learning from the world, and finding new ways to enjoy it. Many studies have demonstrated that people who continue to play games, who continue to explore and learn throughout life, are not only much less prone to dementia and other neurological problems, but are also less likely to get heart disease and other afflictions that seem like they have nothing to do with the brain. For instance, various studies have shown that only a small part of the risk of getting Alzheimer's disease is determined by genes. The majority of the risk of Alzheimer's is attributed to lifestyle and environmental influences. One prospective study done at Albert Einstein and Syracuse universities show that for people who had the most cognitive activity, puzzles, reading, engaging in mentally challenging work, the chances of getting Alzheimer's disease were 63% lower than that of the general population, which that's a pretty high percentage. And certainly that's one of the physical elements. So it's almost a use it or lose it, I think, um, aspect
Use
of
it or lose it. And remember, you can like wake it back up though.
exactly,
Have to
exactly.
find that key that like will sort of unlock the playfulness within you, whether that's and wait, if you're in the chat, if you're in the room with us live too, type out. I would love for you guys to share your ideas of or your experiences of like what how do you play? That's also interesting too, because we can and make sure you're chatting to everybody because we can learn from each other and gain different ideas of like Alice, when we were talking about this in preparation, you had mentioned like sports are a way that people play, which just isn't even in my brain of like a team sport is a way that people play because that's I'm wired differently. But for some people, that is like that's their play and their teamwork and their joy and their everything. So there's so many ways that we can.
Well, and it's interesting because if you think about oh, jigsaw puzzles, playing with your
Cat.
cat, yeah.
Yeah. Having a
If you
cat's
think
always
about one of the aspects of when I started going to CrossFit was I'm a pretty regular exerciser. I have exercised most days of my life. Um, but the aspect of going to CrossFit is that you are partnered up with somebody, and it's not just everybody doing their thing or somebody counting while you're doing it. There's music. There's always really great music playing. And if you guys have met Marco, he's my CrossFit coach, and he's been on Prasada Talks. Will be on one actually coming up on the 12th. But this aspect of like, it feels like when I go there in the morning, now these are all my friends, and it's like basically going to the playground and playing on a bunch of different fun equipment and being like, can you do that? Can I do that? I don't know. How hot are we? Can we do it at the beginning? We couldn't do it at the end. And that's one of the things that's made CrossFit so popular is the social aspect of play. Think about being a kid and like, can you come over and play? It was not really defined. But that social aspect of play, it could also be the total opposite. Maybe you're somebody who loves writing, and that's a very solitary. But that's maybe you write. I have a friend who writes poetry as a way of her, and the idea of a hobby and our play is pretty connected. I was also thinking when you were saying like, how do we refine these things? Oh, swinging on a swing. Yes, I love swinging. My kids would always be like, "Mom, it's time to leave the park," and I'd be like, "No, I want to keep swinging." Um, oh, an improv class. Somebody
I know
said.
I bow to you. I bow to you. We've got someone
Yes.
doing my biggest fear and you're pushing out of your comfort zone. That's
Well,
amazing.
and me, I love. We had a program last week, and the people said no PowerPoint. I was like, yes, yes, because I can talk and talk and talk. But the thing that's interesting to me about sort of reconnecting with is if you think back on what were the things that you were just inclined to do when you were a kid, like you were talking about the creek,
Mhm.
and that like it's not complicated. That doesn't need supplies. That doesn't need other things. You just innately you were drawn to that. Versus somebody else might have been drawn. I love to go outside and just make noises. I remember just making all sorts of different noises, and my father coming out and being like, "Could you be quiet?" And then he would come out a little while later, and I'd be making other noises, and he would say, "Why are you still making noises?" And I said, "Oh, well, they're different noises, and it was sunny when you said to stop making noises." So, and he was just like, "Stop making." But that felt good. That was like that exploration of just being on the swing set and making noises. So, thinking about what is it that you love doing as a child that you innately did, and how can you sort of go back to those particular places or those particular activities. Did you like singing when you were a kid? Was that why you ended up going? Because sometimes also we try to turn our hobby play thing into
Into
a money making thing, and sometimes you'll bake a cake and someone like, you should be a baker, and then suddenly you have a baking business, and suddenly the thing that was play is no longer play because it's now become work or job. Did you like to sing when you were a
I
kid?
always, yeah, I always kind of just was musical. My parents, they forced me to play piano as kind of the foundation of music, which I was grateful for. Um, but yeah, singing came a little bit later. It was kind of always present, but I never thought I was that good until one teacher was like, "You're actually quite a good singer," and that feedback
Mm,
me up, and then opened the doors to, and now I'm studying opera, and that's what I'm getting my degree in. But yeah, it lost some joy, right? Actually studying it in university, because there's a lot of structure that needs to happen.
yeah.
Um, which I eventually found joy, but there were certain ways it lost joy. And I was just like, I don't think this is what I'm supposed to do. But now I go sing karaoke and have a blast. And
Yeah.
that's my play with my voice. Yeah, that how I kind of let that be expressed.
Yeah, I remember during yoga teacher training, we the first class we did a class, and then we sat down. And the teacher said, "Okay, well, what was the class about? What was the structure of the class? What was whatever?" And I had that moment of being like, "Oh wow, I'll never do a yoga class free of the lens of becoming the yoga instructor." And then yoga teacher training was much more intense than I thought it was going to be, and it took me a little while to sort of get that love back of yoga as a practice, as a form of play. Um, Somebody wrote in here, visiting nieces and nephews and see what they're playing with, and then just getting involved. Yeah, again, that attraction to the kid thing, and then video games. Um, Kelly McGonigal, who wrote The Upside of Stress and a book about willpower, her sister, they're twins, and her sister is a video game designer, and her sister was actually really sick. I can't remember what was wrong with her, but she had a she knew she's going to have a very, very long recovery. And she basically made a game. And it's part of the reason why, when we're trying to develop habits, so many of these apps and other things have tried to gamify, because that little bit of joy, even in this heroic app that I have, just the swiping of an arrow that pulls back when you achieve a habit, is an interesting way that they have tried to do that. So yeah, this idea that, I mean, the last thing here, that this is actually in the beginning of the book, he says is that the book is about understanding the role of play and using it to find and express our own core truths. It's about learning to harness a force that has been built into us through millions of years of evolution, a force that allows us to both discover our most essential selves and enlarge our world. We are designed to find fulfillment and creative growth through play.
Mm.
That's a really great summary of just kind of what the possibilities are and why you would do it.
Yeah, and just this remembrance. I like the remembrance, though it can look so many different ways, and it doesn't have to be like tons of time. So it's just finding those little moments, like you said, you started your day just outside looking at the ants. That was, feeling the breeze. That was actually there's no breeze right now in Philadelphia. that's a, that's a hope and a wish that we'll get a breeze.
Exactly,
Um,
we're in that heat of summer.
yeah. Or if you have a creature, just like having a few moments. And I've actually noticed with my cat, who, cats sleep quite a bit, but he really loves to play. And he's 15 years old and he still loves to play,
Mm.
lights up. My partner's been like, we need to play with him more because I feel like that has kept him really young and spry because he just will chase things and has a playful spirit that brings it out in us. But so we're all kind of benefiting in that.
Yeah, and this idea that, play, we talked earlier about this, play can be something active with playing games or being outside or hiking. Um, just even being outside, just looking around. I mean, we've talked about having a sit spot, just going to that particular place. For a long time, I was near my favorite tree, and just taking a little hike, being at that spot, sort of coming back. And then there's also the just making, creating type of play whether it's cooking or gardening or woodworking. I realized when I moved into a house and actually had a yard. Even before that, I spent a lot of time with plants, but this sort of touching of nature, and even people just having to cut their grass, that little bit of time outside is really important. And whether it's just that curiosity. This next month, we're going into creativity. It's going to be our theme for August. But play is also, especially if you do something like sewing or scrapbooking, you're solving problems, you're integrating pieces, you're designing something. And studies have shown that that actually builds the muscles for better problem solving. So these everyday creative play things are actually all those synapses in the brain that keep those functioning about, oh, I see A and I see B and I see something else. And how do I match those together? So that play is actually building our, what I would call our work optimization skills.
Hmm. Good thing to say to your serious adult self. If it's resisting
Yes,
play, just be like, this is also doing good things for my brain, as well as bringing joy and lightheartedness and connection and all of those other great aspects of play.
exactly.
I want to acknowledge we're winding down because we could talk forever, but some of you I know joined on your lunch break, so we'll let you go in a few minutes. Just a couple invitations of things coming up. Alice, do you want to talk about our play competition, our play story competition?
Yeah. So we put out in our newsletter, it was our blog post yesterday, that we're having a little collection. We're going to curate a little collection of play stories. And so these are stories from you guys to just tell us, like, what is your memory or what is a great time that you had playing? And each week we're going to actually do a drawing of people who submit the stories. And you'll be getting a scholarship it's a partial scholarship to our upcoming retreat that is going to be July 20,
28th through
20,
August 2nd
yeah,
in River Mountain, Pennsylvania. Well, it's like close to Bradford or Everett, Pennsylvania, but it's River Mountain Retreat Center is where we're going.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Uh,
about 3 hours from Philadelphia. So
Yeah. Week of breath work. We're going to plant these seeds of intention of play as well. There's a creek, so you'll see me, you'll see me zipping around, splashing in the water, and hopefully we'll join along. So yes, opportunity to receive a partial scholarship for that. Send us your stories of how you like to play or your favorite memories of playing. It's very loose. There's no like it must be this word count or anything. Send us some stories. We'd love to hear. And then next week we have a Prasada Talks called Diving Deeper into Breathwork. We do have more breathwork opportunities popping up. And in case you're curious and still kind of unsure what it is, Alice, myself, and we're going to have Marco Dapke, who Alice mentioned earlier, some fantastic CrossFit expert who's on our team. He'll be joining, and we'll talk about the physiology of breathwork, really the science of breathwork, what's going on and why it's so important.
yeah, especially related to energy. I mean, people don't think about that, but just this idea that you can totally change what your experience is by the way that you are breathing simultaneously. So
Awesome. So that'll be Wednesday, 12:30. Info coming out about that soon. The sign up will be open today on our events page. And then next Friday, Nicole Stottlemyre, one of our favorite team members and probably most playful, I would say.
yes.
She will be teaching. She is a pickleball coach, loves it. She will be teaching a 30-minute pickleball 101. In case you're interested in this, it's the fastest growing sort of team social sport in the US right now. You may have heard of it, you may not have, but if you're curious about learning more about what it is, how to get started, Nicole will be here next Friday, 12:30 to 1 for a little webinar about that. Bring your questions. And Nicole loves to interact, so she'll be sad she can't see your video. So definitely be active on the chat so that can be a nice, robust conversation. Thanks, Alice, for your time and your thoughts on play. And thank you all who came to see us live and gave us some of your play stories and your thoughts on play as well. We'll send this out tomorrow in case anybody missed it. And have a playful rest of your week and take care.